Good evening and welcome back to your view with me, Nkgopotse JJ Tawane. Thank you, Carmen, for those updates from the news feed. We're talking Palestine tonight with Dudu Mahlangu as well as Reverend Boss Ntla, who have kindly agreed to join us on a Sunday night to try and understand the Palestine situation, what's happening now. It's always good to keep in touch with those developments. We saw that just recently the United States issued a long document that was suggesting that they're still wanting to be involved in trying to find a resolution. And they've also seen at the same time that the Palestinian leader has rejected that kind of paper and solution. Let's see what he said.
فإن الصفقة مرفوضة جملة وتفصيلا منذ أن أعلنوا عن ضم القدس وتوحيدها عاصمة لإسرائيل، ولكننا لازلنا نؤمن بالسلام وبثقافة السلام، على أن يتم إنشاء آلية دولية متعددة الأطراف منبثقة عن مؤتمر دولي أو مش منبثقة، بس إحنا بنطالب بهذا، مثل اللجنة الرباعية الدولية.
All right, I hope you could make out there what is being said, but basically they are rejecting the story. I can't see that tiny, but I hope that you're able to make out they're basically rejecting that. Boss, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Just kick us off with since the last time we were here, you had a gathering of people who wanted to look at this issue of Palestine and so on. What's the latest developments? There seems to be, for lack of a better word, going around in circles on this issue. You know, it reminds me of Iran and Iraq, if you remember. Yeah. You know, the thing went on forever. You know, or apartheid itself since 1948. People still haggling until there was so much destruction. What's happening?
Let me start with the meeting we had. I think the last time I was here in the studio, we had some guests, Palestinian Christians, who were here to share a little bit about their story and about their struggles, which in many ways, as you might be aware, is similar, has very striking similarities to our own struggles. And so, and they had opportunity to share those with different church groups. And out of that was a sense that there's been a lot of propaganda about what is actually happening. And one way of remedying that is for people to go to the Holy Land themselves, go on pilgrimages, which though historically such pilgrimages have been one-sided, people have gone to almost one side of this conflict and taken only the narrative of one side. The plea was, let's have a pilgrimage that takes on board both of the sides of this conflict. Because you can't become part of a solution if you only have one side.
One side, yes.
And so that's for the development on the ground here. There are people who are saying definitely would like to be a part of any alternative tourist groups that go there. In terms of the other thing that's happening in the Middle East, I think as you saw in the clip, there is a plan on the table that has been put there by President Donald Trump that proposes to be a deal of the century that presumably will solve the problem of this conflict. Now, the problem with this plan is that it was concocted obviously by the most powerful nation on earth, and by the look of things it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination in consultation with the affected parties.
With the people who are affected.
Exactly, which is the same thing that happened in 1948 when the State of Israel was birthed. It was an agreement by the powerful in those days that excluded completely the people who lived in Palestine. So overnight they woke up to find that there is another state that has been declared in their backyard and even in their own spaces. So it was an imposed solution. And the part of the conflict is that it's been like that ever since. And so what Trump is doing is a repetition of that, imposing a solution on a people without consulting them. And in our own journey, I think in the struggle, we've always said that nothing for us without us.
Without us, absolutely.
And that seems to be a lesson that President Trump doesn't seem to understand.
Yeah. How's your analysis of the situation now? Do you get a sense that the people there have given up or they are despondent? I know that you're involved in a campaign that says disinvest, in Israel and what. But other people, like they argued here, may argue that if you do that, then you're going to disadvantage the poorest because they are not interested in those conflicts at a high level, etc. All they want is a livelihood, and that may be jeopardized. Your perspective?
JJ, people are not giving up. Palestinians are such people that they call it sumud, resistance. But their sumud, as they call it, is more with love and passion. And then when you are someone coming from outside, you wonder, how do you do that after so long, under occupation, under so much distress, and you still have this sumud thing, this humanity. So they are not in any state of giving up so far. They are trapped, highly trapped in. But all that they see is that because there are still people from outside who still come and say, we are with you, that gives them hope. But mostly, what I've learned every time I go there as a South African, it becomes such a huge burden on our shoulders, because when they see a South African, they just see a lively hope based on where we come from apartheid. And for them, it gives them that thing that we came through that, it's possible also for them. They are nowhere giving up. But speaking of BDS, boycott, divestments and sanctions, definitely, mostly as South Africans, this is one thing that we see is going to free the people of Palestine. We know. We came through it. We are where we are today. It's because of boycott and divestments and sanctions. If that did not happen in South Africa, I'm certain we wouldn't be here as black South Africans mostly. So this is one thing that, whether it's going to impoverish them who are under occupation, but at some point they need to give in to that we need to go through more suffering before we get free. Just the same way as we did. Most things, when we started accepting that we go through BDS as South Africans, most of the things we had to suffer. I remember when once my mom was coming from town and he had a bag of Omo, a big bag of Omo, and it was torn in her eyes. But what she said when that thing happened in front of her, when the boys were saying to her, Mama, how can you go to OK, if I may call the name, go to OK and you still come back to it in the location? And she said, no, I did it so that all the world can see what we are facing as South Africans. I knew that when I come here, you will cheer it up, and I knew that the cameras will be watching, so they must see. Palestine needs to go through that.
But in terms of what's happening there, if one can say the struggle there, right? Because the struggle here was characterized by a lot of seismic events. So there was June 76, there was state of emergency. There were things that would make sure the world takes notice, right? What's happening there in Palestine? Because there seems to be a little bit of either no attention by the international media about what's happening there, or it seems like there's a retreat, because you used to have a lot of activity where Palestinians were engaging with their armed forces in the occupied territories, etc., etc. Or sometimes you just have more occupation, etc. What's happening now that suggests that the people of Palestine haven't given up?
Sure, that's a difficult one for me to really put a finger or point a finger on answering you straight, because media, not discouraging in terms of what you do, guys, but
Yeah.
mostly what you have been given is not the true picture of what is happening inside of Palestine. You are not taken to the spaces where things are happening. You are not taken to the spaces where people are talking out to the world, to the international people, and saying this is what is happening. You are speaking of South Africa having 1976 boycott. There have been in 2007, 2017 as well in Palestine, they did have uprising. But it was not televised or talked about in media as it would have been if it was in South Africa, because the US is making sure that most of the news that Palestinians need to take out to the world is cut off. It's not shared with the people.
I think even as we
Yeah.
speak now, after the announcement
Yeah.
by Trump, people were took to the streets. People protest. And such protests are normally put down with a heavy-handedness that is often out of proportion with the protests themselves in terms
Yeah.
of violence. And so that's almost routine. You know, it happens so routinely that people no longer bother to listen or to watch. But all of that to say, the people of Palestine are determined to resist even the current deal that has been placed as a plan which they see as something to buy them off. They are determined.
Is there a danger of fatigue in that regard? I know that this was a danger that faced us here as well. If you look at the amount of international attention we got, let's say, between the 70s and 80s, was different from the one that we got between maybe the 80s, early 80s.
Yeah.
Right, until there was state of emergency, and then the streets were ungovernable again, and then the tension came back. Is there that kind of maybe difficulty there that people, the media just say, we're exhausted, no, there's nothing new, they're just marching again, and so on?
That fatigue happens, you know, it does happen, and that is why we promote and do works with this a lot. Do continually takes young South Africans to Palestine and spending 3 months at a stretch, accompanying Palestinians through their daily lives, just to see and witness what is happening and how they negotiate all of the obstacles that they have to face. And they are heart-rending stories that these young South Africans come back having witnessed firsthand how Palestinians are treated, what they have to go through daily. And many of them come back saying it is so much worse than what we've ever seen here in terms of apartheid. And so it's a way of trying to to deal with the fatigue. Fatigue happens, you know, in the media it's easy, you know,
they always want catchy news.
Yeah, the media always goes to freshness. So when a struggle has been going on forever, it bores media. It doesn't sell as much. And so that's why we, as church people, have learned not to base our witness on so much on or rely
what gets reported, but on what is actually happening on the ground.
Exactly.
With your networks there. Maybe we must bring these young people here to come and tell us those stories.